Welcome back to Maths with Mrs. J. We've been talking about trigonometry of right-angled triangles, and we've been going through some examples. Just to remind you, we have three main trig ratios that we're talking about. Sine of an angle is the ratio of the opposite to the hypotenuse. Cos of an angle is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and tan of an angle is the opposite over the adjacent. And we've done some examples where we've labelled the sides of the right-angled triangle, and then we've decided which trig ratio is appropriate. We've substituted and we've gone ahead and used our calculator. We're still doing that now. Let's have a look at some of these examples and see how we go. So, all right, let's label our sides. Here's our angle that we're talking about. So with respect to this angle, your 5 metres is your adjacent side. Your x is opposite your right angle, so that's of course your hypotenuse. Okay, what rule, thinking back to our soccer tile, what rule involves the adjacent and the hypotenuse? The cosine ratio. Cos of theta is adjacent on hypotenuse. All right, so we've labelled our sides, we've made the decision that it's related to the cosine ratio. So now we're going to sub into our rule. So instead of theta, we've got 37 degrees. Instead of our adjacent, we've got our 5 metres. And instead of our hypotenuse, we've got our x. Now, this stage here, I just want you to be a little bit aware. Don't automatically assume that the x is going to be in the numerator, because it won't necessarily always be in the numerator. All right, we need to substitute in accordingly. The adjacent side was your 5 metres and your hypotenuse was your x. Now, how are we going to get the x out of this? What actually happens is you would multiply both sides by x to get the x off the bottom. And then you've got to get rid of this cos of 37. So the x ends up being 5 metres divided by cos of 37. Now, what in essence you're kind of doing, and this is highly unmathematical to say this, but you're kind of like doing a swapsy, all right? If the x is in the bottom, see how they've swapped over? And once you're at that point, then you can just plug it into your calculator as we've been doing. But in this case, instead of multiplying, we're going to divide. So we're going to do 5 divided by cos of 37. And we get to 2 decimal places, we get 6.26 metres. So the only difference between what we've just done and what we've done in previous videos was that in this case, the x happened to be in the denominator. So it's just a little bit more algebra to get the x on its own. But if you think about it like this, you can go straight from that step to that step and then to your calculator, and that's perfectly fine. All right, let's try the next example. All right, here's our angle. We have nothing on our hypotenuse, we're not even interested in that. This side over here is opposite our angle. The x is adjacent to the angle, adjacent next to. Which rule are we going to use here? That's correct, it's the tan rule. So tan of theta is your opposite side over your adjacent side. So you work out what rule, write down the rule. Next step is to substitute in. So tan of 23 degrees. Our opposite side is our 2 metres. Our adjacent side is our x. So it's happened again that the x is in the bottom. What are we going to do? We're going to multiply by x and divide by that. So the x is going to be 2 metres divided by tan of 23. And you can plug that into your calculator and round off, and you should get 4.71 metres approximately. Okay, let's move on. All right, we've got some more of the same. So we're going to label our sides. All right, well, we've got a hypotenuse here. And the x is opposite your angle, isn't it? What trig ratio involves opposite and hypotenuse? The sine ratio. Absolutely. So sine of our 68 is our opposite on our hypotenuse. Don't just assume that because the last two examples the x has been in the bottom that this x is going to be in the bottom. It's not. You've got to do a proper substitution. The opposite happens to be the x in this case. So the x is in the top. All right? So to get the x, we're going to do 10 metres times our sine 68. So don't sort of make any assumptions about where you think the x is going to be. You substitute it in according to what it is in the rule. All right? Use our calculator and we get approximately 9.27 metres. And our last one for this video, we've got, all right, well, obviously our x is our hypotenuse and our 8 metres is our adjacent. What rule are we going to use? Adjacent and hypotenuse is to do with our cosine ratio. So we write our rule, always write your rule. Okay, you probably even get half a point just for putting the right rule. And we're going to sub in our angle and sub in the adjacent side happens to be our 8 metres and our hypotenuse happens to be our x. So yes, this is going to be one of those, shall we say, swapsy moments where we're going to multiply by the x and then divide by our cos of 58. So we're going to get 8 metres divided by cos of 58 degrees. And in our calculator, we're going to do that and we're going to round off and we're going to get 15.10 metres.